The winter of 1871 was no ordinary freeze. It came down like a punishment from heaven, encasing Boston in sleet and soot, paralyzing its wharves, and silencing its markets beneath a crust of gray frost. Chimneys poured black ribbons into the pale sky, ships clanged in the harbor ice, and on every corner, boot heels cracked against frozen cobbles. But it wasn't the cold that terrified people. It was the silence that came after the screams. Children were going missing. Not vanishing outright, but found, days later, in back alleys and snow-choked lots. Alive, often. But ruined. Torn clothing, shattered bones, long scratches like wire-thin claws. One had sewing needles pressed beneath his fingernails. Another was discovered curled like a dead bird in a barrel behind a tavern, so pale he seemed carved from soap. The pattern was always the same: young boys, between 4 and 8, brutalized and discarded like meat. And yet they lived. Boston's newspapers tread carefully. Some printed nothing at all, fearful of a panic that might crush commerce or shame the precinct brass. Others blamed a drifter, a madman, some gaunt former soldier from the war. But the people whispered something worse. In tenement kitchens and factory corners, mothers spoke low about the boy from Charlestown, the one with the dead white eye. Henry Blake. Not yet 15. But cursed, they said. Strange since birth. And mean in ways no man had taught him. He walked barefoot through snowbanks. He stared too long and never blinked. One child said he smiled when cats screamed. Another swore she saw him reading a book about hangings while chewing raw meat from a butcher's pail. Yet none could accuse him outright. Not then. He was still only a boy. And Boston, with all its brick and lace and oil lamp pride, had never wanted to admit its worst monsters came from within. Henry Blake entered the world on the cold floor of a Charlestown boarding house on January 17, 1859, a storm howling at the shutters, his mother barely surviving the birth. He came out in silence. No cry, no motion, only the rhythmic breath of something that refused to be swaddled or soothed. The midwife, a superstitious Irishwoman, crossed herself twice before cutting the cord. She would later tell neighbors that the boy had, the mark, a milky, glazed left eye, motionless as stone, the color of fish belly and fog. His father, George Blake, a bricklayer and veteran of the Mexican War, didn't see a child. He saw a punishment. A defect. Something misshapen in spirit as well as in face. By the time Henry could walk, George was striking him regularly, not out of drunkenness or rage, but from the mechanical conviction that pain could discipline anything unnatural. "No boy of mine'll grow soft," he was known to mutter, as if trying to convince himself the thing in his home was truly his. Neighbors remembered Henry for his silences. He didn't run with other boys, didn't join games in the street or toss stones in the harbor. Instead, he lingered around bookstalls and junk carts, eyes flicking between newsprint and gutters, fascinated by stories of executions, battlefield punishments, and shipwrecks. He would stare at a drawing of a guillotine for hours. When the butcher's cart passed, Henry followed it, barefoot even in March, staring at the hanging slabs of meat as if studying something personal. By the time he was 7, Henry was a phantom at the edge of other children's lives, never one of them, but always there. Watching. It began with the cats. One-eyed, maimed things started turning up behind Charlestown stables and under railings. Their bodies bore signs of human cruelty, ears sliced neatly off, ribs broken one by one, whiskers singed. Then came the dogs. Strangled with shoelaces. Legs twisted until the bones splintered outward. One night, a terrier belonging to the local grocer's son was found impaled on a wooden fence. No one saw who did it, but the boy who found it claimed that Henry had been watching from the shadows, his white eye catching the moonlight like a coin dropped in a well. At school, he was mocked without mercy. "Devil's boy," they called him. "Lazy eye lurch." When he refused to react, they threw stones. One struck his cheek and opened a gash near his temple. He didn't cry. He simply stood, collected the stone, and pocketed it. That night, the boy who'd thrown it woke up with a slashed ear. His parents blamed the rats. But rats don't sharpen their claws. Teachers tried to discipline him, caning for insolence, for failing to recite, for reading forbidden material behind his slate, but Henry never flinched. He took his punishments with a quiet, eerie calm, and afterward, his behavior would grow worse, not better. At age 9, he stopped attending school altogether. His mother claimed illness, but when the truant officer knocked, Henry answered the door himself. "She's sleeping," he said without blinking. "I'll be quiet now." The man left unsettled. The house smelled like damp bread and scorched wool, and the boy stood too still, as if rehearsing how humans were supposed to act. Around that same time, a charwoman reported finding a strange item beneath the floorboards of a boarding house near Bunker Hill, a box filled with charred animal bones, broken pocket watches, and several dolls, all missing their eyes. Nothing was ever proven. The landlord discarded the box. But the rumors, already circling, began to tighten. Henry's mother, Margaret Blake, had changed too. Once known for her laughter and generous helpings at the church kitchen, she became withdrawn and sharp. Neighbors noticed she rarely left the house anymore. When she did, she covered her arms in long gloves, even in summer. Her once proud posture had turned to a twitching stoop. One day, she was seen in the alley behind their house, muttering to herself and scrubbing at a bloodstain on a child's shirt. No children were missing. No crimes could be pinned to Henry. But Charlestown began to whisper more openly now, in taverns, in sewing circles, at communion. The boy was wrong. Cursed. Touched by something neither the schoolmasters nor the priests could reach. One priest, Father Callahan of St. John's, insisted on visiting the Blake home. He was not seen again for 2 days. When he finally reappeared, he was pale and shaking, with a stitched wound behind his right ear. He claimed he'd fallen on the ice. But he never returned to the Blake house. 3 months later, he left Boston altogether. Henry, meanwhile, remained unbothered. He walked the alleys with his hands in his pockets and his wide eye fixed on nothing in particular. On more than one occasion, he was seen drawing in a little black notebook. A girl named Clara, who once peered over his shoulder, said it wasn't writing. It was diagrams. Of people. Opened up. She didn't speak to him again. Then came the winter of 1871. A boy named Stephen Hartwell, 6 years old, from a family of shipyard laborers, disappeared on his way to fetch coal. He was found the next morning in an alley off City Square, alive but ruined. His hands were burned. His feet had been crushed with something heavy. A single pin had been driven beneath each eyelid. He was too traumatized to speak. But he kept repeating one word, over and over, in a whisper. I. Henry Blake didn't go to school. Didn't work. Wasn't seen that week. But on the evening Stephen was found, a black notebook was quietly burned in the Blake hearth, and the smell that drifted from the chimney made 3 women crossing the street stop and shudder without knowing why. That was the first time the police came calling. Not to charge. Just to ask. To feel the walls. To look around. They left with nothing. But one officer, an Irishman named Riley, wrote in his private notes, later archived. There's cold, and then there's whatever's in that boy. That wasn't weather. That was something born wrong. Spring arrived late in 1872, and when it came, it did not soften Boston. The snow receded only to reveal rot, broken barrels, rats fat with the secrets of winter, alleys lined with pale mud and the smell of drowned things. Factories sputtered back to life, and children ran again between horses and carts, freed from their long confinement. It was on such a day, bright, chill, with wind off the bay, that 4-year-old William Travers vanished. He had been playing near the blacksmith's lot in Chelsea, chasing a hoop with a stick. His mother, Martha Travers, turned her back only a moment to haggle over bread. When she looked again, the boy was gone. At first, she thought he'd wandered behind the crates. When he didn't answer her call, panic set in. Within an hour, neighbors joined the search, and by dusk, the police had been summoned. He was found the next morning in a collapsed shed behind an old tannery near 2nd Street. A ragpicker's boy discovered him, whimpering softly under a broken plank, barely alive. His wrists were bound with twine. His lips had been sewn shut with thread, for crude stitches punched through the skin. His feet were burned, and both knees showed signs of being struck with a mallet or hammer. He was covered in bruises, but what chilled the constable was the boy's face, still expressionless, not a tear, not even a cry. He was rushed to the almshouse infirmary. The doctor said it was a miracle he'd survived. Martha collapsed upon seeing him, and it was 3 days before she could speak a full sentence. William was too young to understand the terror he had survived, but in his fevered sleep, he repeated a strange phrase over and over again. Glass eye. The glass-eyed boy. The nurse who first heard it, Miss O'Connell, thought nothing of it. But by the 4th night, other orderlies had heard the same phrase. Glass eye. The boy with no blink. He hurt the kittens. He pulled my feet. And then, most disturbing, he told me I'm just a dog now. When Martha Travers recovered enough to speak, she confirmed that William had once pointed out a boy he didn't like. It had been on a walk to Charlestown with his father. That boy, William had said, staring across the street. He looks without looking. When asked what he meant, he just shook his head. Police questioned the family but found nothing suspicious. No one had seen anything. No strangers, no wagons. The Travers home was a single room above a millworker's pub. The shed where William had been found was a long-abandoned structure used by no one since the fire of 1868. The report was written plainly. Assault, unknown assailant. Male child survived. No witnesses. But inside the Chelsea station house, off the record, officers began to murmur. It was the 3rd such case in as many months, the 5th if one counted certain unreported cases in the South End. Always boys. Always mutilated but alive. And now a name. They compared notes. One constable remembered a boy with a pale eye who loitered near the ferry docks, watching the water like he was waiting for it to speak. Another officer, who worked the Charlestown beat, mentioned a child named Blake, strange family, quiet mother, bad history. The child was rarely seen in school. There had been trouble years ago with cats, with a priest who moved away suddenly. Still, no one dared make an official accusation. Who arrests a child for rumors? But the press had sharper instincts. A young reporter named Tobias Quinn, new to the Boston Globe, caught wind of the Travers case and began pulling threads. He visited the shed. Interviewed Martha. Watched the boy sleep in the infirmary. Then he knocked on the door of the Blake household. No one answered. Quinn returned 2 days later. Still nothing. But a neighbor across the hall, a washerwoman named Mrs. Gertrude Linney, gave him a peculiar account. That boy, Henry? He don't play, don't speak, don't flinch. But I seen him with rats. He pulls their tails off one by one, drops them in water buckets to see how long they kick. I said nothing, he's just a boy, ain't he? But now I lock my door when he walks past. She said it with no theatrics. No malice. Only the weariness of someone who has decided not to see what she knows is there. Quinn returned to the paper with his findings. But his editor, Mr. Saltonstall, refused to publish the piece. You want to accuse a child of ritual torture based on a lunatic washerwoman and a mumbling infant? We're not in the business of causing riots, Mr. Quinn. So the article was scrapped. The story was softened, rephrased as a general piece on dangers facing unattended children in industrial cities. The name Blake was never mentioned. But word had already spread through the alleyways and tenement halls. The story passed from kitchen to kitchen, mutating in the way all true rumors do. One child said Henry drank chicken blood. Another swore he kept a jar of teeth. The phrase, glass-eyed boy, became a playground curse. Mothers pulled their sons in early. Fathers refused to hire errand boys from that side of the river. In the back pews of churches and the smoke-choked bars of East Boston, the name Henry Blake became something more than a name. It was an omen. A suggestion that evil did not always wear the face of a man. Sometimes it wore the skin of a child and sat quietly while the city tried to look away. Behind the walls of their crumbling apartment, Margaret Blake barely spoke. Her hair had gone white at the roots, though she was only 38. Henry, she insisted, was a gentle boy. Misunderstood. Hounded by cruelty, not the source of it. He's quiet because you people never listened, she told a neighbor who dared confront her. He reads because the world makes more sense in books. But when asked why Henry never cried, never laughed, and why cats still avoided their steps, she slammed the door. The city had no evidence. But the streets remembered. And across police desks, on notepads and margins, 3 words appeared more and more often, written softly, in pencil, then underlined: Watch Henry Blake. The summer of 1872 arrived as a humid fog bank, choking Boston in its own filth. The stench of the harbor rotted inland. Fish died in barrels before reaching market. Soot clung to laundry lines like mold. In the alleys of South Boston, where barefoot children darted between garbage heaps, mothers whispered warnings between tobacco-stained teeth. Don't stray. Don't talk to boys you don't know. Especially not ones who stare. The warnings weren't baseless. By July, 5 more boys had turned up injured. Always found in hidden places, behind brickyards, in coal sheds, under porches. All alive, all brutalized, and none able to offer a clear description of their attacker, save for one consistent detail. He was older than me. But not big. He had a strange eye. One eye, like a button. Police finally began connecting dots, albeit behind closed doors. A sergeant in Roxbury named Bernard Fallon kept a personal folder, off-record, marked Juvenile Predator. Inside, clippings from 3 newspapers, photographs of children's shoes found in drains, and a hand-drawn map. Red circles marked the locations of each attack, all within walking distance of the Charlestown Ferry, the gasworks, or an abandoned train station on Foundry Street. Fallon submitted his suspicions to his captain, citing a possible repeat offender of juvenile age, targeting younger children in systematically cruel fashion. The report was shelved. Too speculative. We don't arrest ghost stories, the captain said. Especially not when they come wearing short pants. But the rumors were no longer ghost stories. On August 9th, a 7-year-old boy named Franklin Dooley was found in the ruins of an old rope factory. His arms were bound behind him with sash cord, and nails had been driven into the soles of his feet. A paper bag had been tied over his head, containing dead mice and a melted candle. A fire had been lit around him, a small ring of scorched brick and tar paper, but it had burned out before reaching his skin. Franklin was the first victim to speak clearly. He had brown hair. Pale. He said his name was Harry. Or Henry. He told me it was a game. A secret game. When asked about the eye, Franklin nodded. White. Like milk. He said not to look at it or I'd forget my name. That was the tipping point. Sergeant Fallon took the statement straight to Inspector Langworthy of the South District. Langworthy, a skeptical man by nature and rank, finally ordered an informal inquiry. Officers canvassed tenements near the docks, asking about any boys matching the description. One name recurred, Blake. But the address they were given no longer held the family. Margaret Blake had moved. Quietly. Quickly. Without notice. Neighbors said they left in the night, cart piled high, no forwarding information. A widow now, they added, George Blake had died in spring from a stroke or a fall, depending on who was asked. Some claimed he was found face down in the basement, his skull broken. No inquest followed. Margaret had taken her son across the river. South Boston. A narrow 3-room tenement above a sewing parlor. She opened a modest dress shop in May, Blake's Mending and Hemming. Simple signage, lace curtains, polite service. Henry was seen behind the counter, neatly dressed, eyes cast down, handing thread to matrons and measuring hems in perfect silence. And the attacks resumed? In the weeks that followed, new victims emerged, from Southey this time. A boy named Leonard Welch was found beneath a pier near the fish market, fingers crushed between stones. Another, George Bartlett, was discovered inside a disused livery stable, blindfolded and cut across the chest in deliberate, shallow lines. But something had changed. The violence had escalated, not just in method, but in intent. One boy had his tongue pricked through with sewing needles. Another had carvings in his scalp, words no one could decipher, scraped shallowly with broken glass. A pattern began to emerge, invisible to the city, but not to someone who'd been watching. Tobias Quinn, the same reporter who'd been shut down in spring, had continued investigating on his own. He had collected every incident, every whisper. In a trunk under his boarding room bed, he kept photographs, sketches, names. And in the center of it all, a single name, scrawled over and over again: Henry Blake. Quinn began corresponding with a former teacher from Charlestown Grammar who remembered Henry vividly. The teacher, Mr. Ellison, recalled the boy's inhuman patience, the way he would sit motionless through lectures and never speak unless spoken to. There was no mischief in him, Ellison wrote. Only calculation. He also remembered something else, an old wooden box Henry carried. It contained news clippings, snippets of poems, drawings of knives. He had confiscated it once and been disturbed by what he found: diagrams of hands, with each finger labeled in cursive as if part of a recipe. The box disappeared shortly after. So did Henry, withdrawn from school, allegedly due to illness. Quinn tracked down a former neighbor of the Blakes in South Boston, a washerwoman named Maeve Costello. She claimed to have heard strange noises at night from the Blake dress shop, banging, dragging, what sounded like weeping. "At first I thought rats," she said. "But rats don't beg." She mentioned the name Ellie Rose, a local girl who vanished in early July. Just 9 years old. Vanished on her way back from the grocer's with a loaf of bread. No one ever saw her again. The police presumed abduction. No leads. Quinn made inquiries. He learned that Margaret Blake had taken delivery of several loads of coal that same week, more than a small dress shop could possibly require, and that the cellar beneath her building had been sealed after a supposed pipe break. The landlord had not inspected it. Quinn pushed harder. He visited the shop under pretense of ordering repairs on a torn coat. Henry greeted him politely, took his measurements, offered him tea. His speech was precise, correct. His eye, the marble-white one, did not blink once. Quinn left with a creeping sickness in his stomach. And when he returned that night to the shop, alone, and peeked through the basement window with a lantern, he saw something that turned his blood cold. A child's shoe. Scorched. Half buried in ash. He reported it to police the next morning. The basement was inspected. But by then, it had been cleaned. No trace of ash. No shoe. Just the smell, faint, acrid, wrong. The report filed was empty. No further action taken. Quinn returned home and opened his trunk. He clipped another article and placed it in the box. He closed the lid. And whispered as if to no one, "You're keeping count. I will too." Autumn came early that year, bringing raw winds off the harbor that smelled of brine, soot, and something sour. The people of South Boston, already on edge from the summer's horrors, now pulled their coats tighter and locked their doors earlier. Children were kept in after dusk. Whispers grew heavier than smoke. The papers, though still cautious, finally used a phrase that had previously only existed in murmurs: the little butcher. They did not name him. But they described him. A youth of unusual demeanor, possible deformity of one eye, suspected in connection with a spate of injuries to local children. The police were pursuing all leads. But no arrests were made. And then came the Pratt boy. George Pratt was 7, freckled, curious, fond of building ships from scrap. On September 17th, he went missing while playing near the Tidipools at Carson Beach. His mother reported him gone by sundown. The next morning, he was found by a fisherman's son, lying on the wet stones like a discarded rag. His body was intact, but covered in bite marks. Not animal bites. Human ones. Small, from a child's mouth, perhaps, but placed with cruel precision, avoiding vital areas, keeping him conscious. His back had been marked with needles in a pattern. Later, a nurse said it resembled Morse code. George survived, but never spoke again. Dr. Lionel Westcott, the surgeon who treated him, told reporters. This was not the act of an unthinking animal. Whoever did this was deliberate, methodical, practiced. 2 days later, a boy named Samuel Leary was found in the salt marshes, tied to an old lobster crate, half strangled, his lips blue, hands bruised as if he had fought for hours before finally giving in. He too lived. Barely. By now, public panic could no longer be restrained. Parents formed watch patrols. Boys were forbidden to travel alone. The city offered a reward, $200 for information leading to the apprehension of the attacker. 4 days, Boston seethed with frightened vigilance. But no one suspected the boy behind the counter at the mending shop. Henry Blake was polite, soft-spoken. He stood with his hands folded, greeted customers with a bow of the head, measured cuffs without touching the skin. He had learned, perhaps, what mask to wear. Or perhaps he had always known. His presence soothed the elderly widows who came in for lace repair. His gaze disturbed no one now. He did not stare anymore. He watched. Only one woman found him strange, Mrs. Harriet Minnie, a laundress with a sharp memory. She remembered the eye. She remembered seeing him, months prior, near the docks where young Pratt used to play. She told the police. But the report was filed and forgotten. Meanwhile, in the bowels of that shop, beneath the click of scissors and the smell of starch, something lay buried in coal ash. A girl. No one knew her name. No one even knew she was missing. She had no parents. She had come from a poorhouse or perhaps a steamer from Canada. Ellie Rose, they would later call her, a name given only after death. She had been gone for weeks by the time the ash was stirred. It was not a constable who found her, nor a detective, but a chimney sweep, a wiry youth named Emmett who crawled the flues of South Boston for pennies. One morning, he arrived at Blake's mending and hemming to clear a backed-up vent. The mother answered. Smiled too brightly. No need, she said. We've already arranged it. But Emmett saw something in the soot trail that disturbed him, a boot print too small, too new, leading down into the cellar. When he returned that night, curious and foolish, he brought a candle and crept through the coal chute. He never reached the furnace. But he saw enough. Just a sliver, a girl's foot, pale against the dark. A shoe still laced. Hair caught in cinders. He ran. And told no one. Not right away. Who would believe a sweep? But the fear rooted in his bones. Days passed. He drank. He tried to forget. Then, one night, he knocked on the door of Tobias Quinn. I have something, he said. I think someone's been keeping bodies. Quinn's hands trembled as he wrote. Where? Blake's. It took 3 days to convince the police to act. Even then, they came without warrant, just 2 beaten men and a night sergeant, knocking politely, under pretense of inspecting building permits. Margaret Blake met them in her apron. Henry sat at the sewing table, mending a hem. The officers descended to the cellar. They found ash. Nothing more. The furnace had been cleaned recently. Too recently. When asked, Margaret smiled. We were preparing for winter. The police left empty-handed. Quinn wrote again. Furious now. Desperate. Do not let this slip, he wrote in his private journal. There is a predator here, young in years, but old in cruelty. And the city hides him. He sent letters to editors. None were printed. Meanwhile, Henry's presence in the shop grew eerier. Customers reported strange smells, like burned cloth and vinegar. One woman said she found a pin in her coat sleeve after a repair, embedded deep. Another claimed she saw a child's tooth beneath the cash drawer. But Margaret denied it all. Vicious gossip, she said. My boy's kind. He's gentle. You people never wanted to understand him. Still, the rumors grew. And then came a fire. A nearby dressmaker's shop went up in flames late one night. Arson, they said. And from the soot rose another name, Ellie Rose. Her cousin claimed she had gone to fetch thread weeks ago. Never returned. She had mentioned a news shop, run by a quiet boy. The connection was made too late. The dressmaker's records, Henry's shop included, had burned. And in the ashes, another silence fell. The authorities turned inward. More patrols. More interviews. But Henry remained untouched. He walked the streets calmly. Visited the apothecary. Bought needles. Thread. Lye. Always with exact change. One shopkeeper recalled his voice. Soft. Like he was telling secrets to himself. And he always bought 2 of everything. Twice as much, he said once. In case the first one screams. April 22, 1874, began with clear skies and the promise of spring. The ice had finally broken along the bay, and the streets shimmered with muddy water and pale blossoms of crushed plum. Children emerged from winter like survivors from a siege, running wild, coats unbuttoned, hair wet with sweat. That morning, 4-year-old Tom Mills was seen chasing a stick along the edge of Dorchester Bay, barefoot, laughing, the air warm enough to forget fear. He was gone by noon. His mother, Eliza, alerted neighbors before the hour passed. She had only turned to speak to the grocer, she swore, only for a moment. The child had been playing by the seawall, then vanished. By evening, the city shook with alarm. Patrols were dispatched. Search parties formed. The shoreline was combed with lanterns and dogs. Quinn joined them, exhausted and cold, scouring the rocks beneath the tide markers. He knew, in his heart, before they found the boy, where he would be, and what they would see. They found Tom just before midnight. His body lay half submerged on the desolate stretch of shore between the saltworks and the abandoned ferry station. A dockhand named Felix Brogan saw the pale shape in his lamplight and froze. What he mistook for driftwood was, in fact, a child, naked, marked, and still. The sight was unspeakable. Tom's skin was carved. Not slashed, carved. Crude symbols, almost runic, spiraled around his chest. His right eye had been removed. His mouth was stuffed with cloth, a linen handkerchief, later identified by his mother. On his throat, in jagged, blood-dried letters, someone had drawn a single word. Quiet. For the first time, no one used the word accident. The police mobilized with a speed they had previously reserved for riots and gang wars. Inspector Langworthy took direct command. Quinn arrived before sunrise, refusing to leave the shoreline, his notes soaked from sea mist. He had seen many horrors in 2 years of reporting. This one shattered him. The footprints in the sand led northeast, small, deep, deliberate. Not a man's stride. A boy's. The tracks passed through bramble, over drift logs, and up toward the southern edge of Dorchester Hill, where they vanished near a cluster of worker cottages. Officers were sent door to door. Dogs followed the scent back toward the dry goods lane, and then, unmistakably, toward Blake's mending and hemming. By then, neighbors were already murmuring. Henry had been seen that day. Twice. Once walking with a parcel beneath his coat. Once down by the old seawall, alone, eyes to the ground. Langworthy ordered the premises searched. Margaret resisted. "You have no warrant," she said. But her voice lacked its usual iron. Her hands trembled. The officers ignored her. Henry stood silently at the back of the shop, polishing a pair of sewing shears. He did not speak. He did not run. When Sergeant Fallon approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, Henry turned and looked at him calmly. "I suppose I did it," he said. Those were his only words. The cellar was unlocked. What they found within would enter court records, diaries, sermons, and nightmares. There was a work table. Not unusual. But stained, dark and old, the edges etched with scratches like tally marks. Beside it, a length of twine, a rusted basin, a broken doll with no eyes. And in the far corner, under a spread of coal, a shallow pit. Inside it, bones. Dozens. Small. Burned. Some had been wrapped in cloth. Others bore tool marks. Teeth marks. A few still had scraps of ribbon or shoe buckles clinging to them. Among them, the final confirmation, Tom Mills's left shoe. Henry made no attempt to deny what was found. Nor did he elaborate. He was arrested without incident, placed in a wagon, and taken to the South End lockhouse. The press swarmed the building before the hour ended. One photograph, blurry, off-center, shows the boy staring through the barred window, his expression unreadable, his pale eye catching the sun like a coin tossed into deep water. Quinn remained outside the cell most of the night, writing feverishly. "Boston," he wrote, "has no words for this. We raised him. We ignored him. We fed him through our cracks and clothed him in silence. What is Henry Blake, if not our creation?" The interrogation was brief. Langworthy asked if he understood the charges. Henry nodded. Asked why he did it, Henry blinked once, the first time anyone saw him do so, and said, "Because I could." No remorse. No rage. No defense. The trial, when it came, would be the most watched in the city's recent history. But for now, Henry sat in silence, drawing on the walls of his cell with soot and buttons torn from his own coat. One guard later testified that the drawings were faces. Not of people, but of expressions, wide mouths, twisted eyes, hollow sockets. Dozens. A study in what pain looked like, when it was not his own. Margaret was arrested for obstruction. She denied all knowledge. "My son was troubled," she said, "but he was never cruel." When shown the cellar, she fainted. The bodies were identified slowly. Tom. Ellie Rose. Others remain nameless. Ashes have no ledger. On April 26, Henry was indicted on 4 counts of attempted murder, and 3 of murder. The prosecutors feared they would uncover more. Quinn published his final article on the case that week. He called it, "The Boy Beneath the Floor." Henry Blake's trial began on June 1, 1874, at the Suffolk County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed, reporters, reformers, matrons in mourning veils, and gawkers who had stood in lines since dawn. They came not just to see a murderer, but to confront the unbearable idea that a child, only 15, could possess such monstrous intent. The prosecution laid out the case with chilling clarity: the burned bones in the cellar, the shoelaces used as bindings, the victim's matching wounds, the handkerchief in Tom Mills's mouth. Testimony from the children who had survived left the gallery in tears. Several had to be excused from the room. One mother fainted. Henry said nothing. He sat with his hands folded, calm, unmoved. He did not cry. He did not deny. His only reaction came when the drawings from his cell were shown. He smiled. The jury took only 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The judge, overcome with disgust, sentenced him to death by hanging. But Governor Washburn intervened. "We do not hang children," he declared, "even when they behave like devils." Henry's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in solitary confinement at the Massachusetts State Reform School in Westboro. He was transferred under heavy guard, shackled at wrists and ankles. There he remained. Years passed. Henry grew silent. His white eye turned blind, the other dimmed. He lost his voice after refusing food and was force-fed for a time. Yet even in confinement he studied law, Latin, medicine. He wrote verse. No visitors. No contact. In 1932, nearly 6 decades later, Henry Blake died in his cell. He had not spoken in 31 years. The guards found his body seated upright, hands crossed, facing the wall. He was buried in an unmarked grave. Boston tried to forget. But beneath the city, the memory festered, whispers of other missing children, of shapes glimpsed in fog. And sometimes, in South Boston, they still say his name. Quietly. Just in case he's listening.